Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another installment of the Hill and Brothers podcast. I'm your co-host, Brandon Jones, and I'm joined by the legendary Sam Simmons. How are you doing today, Sam?
I'm good. I'm good. No complaints here. Yeah, no complaints here. How about
Good.
you?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Life has gotten a little better in the Jones household. My wife was able to return home a couple days ago, so we kind of broke her out of the hospital to get her home. But we'll still be having the baby earlier than expected, towards the end of the month, early October, late September. So outside of that, things are going pretty good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You know, I'm glad to hear that.
I'm done having babies after this, though. I can tell you that right now.
Wait a minute. Whoa, whoa,
This is-
whoa. I'm trying to think. Didn't I hear that before?
you did, but this, having health scares and all that, I don't like none of this stuff. So I'm good. I tried to do the top. I tried to have a boy just to see if it could work, and I struck out. So I don't plan on doing this anymore. I am good.
And how does she feel about that?
She's saying hold your horses and let's think about that later. I've already thought about it. I'm good. I don't know why she would want to even go through another birthing experience at this point, but I don't want to cast my judgment onto her.
Right. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm glad everything is fine at this point. Um, so let's start a conversation.
Yeah, so on Friday, I joined you on local Camo J Radio, the Voices program with yourself and Jatan Johnson. And we had a conversation in response to the continuous community violence that we've seen really all year. But this summer has been very deadly for many, and it has touched a lot of different folks in different ways. And we've seen different types of unfortunate and heinous incidents. More recently, we had a local school teacher who was murdered. We had a 12-year-old boy who was murdered by an 18-year-old boy. We have four people from the Twin Cities who were found dead and murdered, and their bodies were dumped in Wisconsin. We have a young lady who was shot and may not be able to recover her voice, she was getting ready to attend college this semester. That would happen a few weeks ago. She's a local North Minneapolis young person. And it's just, I mean, there's so many other things that we can add onto. I was watching the news briefly yesterday, and they were talking to someone who's a part of the downtown kind of like safety coalition. They live downtown, they work downtown, and they have this group. And this person was robbed downtown about a week ago. And and this person was just talking about how frustrating it's been at trying to keep downtown Minneapolis safe, and it just seems like things are getting out of control. And this is the person who's leading the group downtown to protect downtown, ends up getting mugged in broad daylight, by the way. That was the other thing, too. So things are getting interesting here when it comes to this lash out of violence. I guess we could say crime. We have I haven't seen any local domestic violence numbers, but I'm pretty sure that those could be pretty high given the just where we're at as far as in society. But what I have seen is some of the local demands on therapy, and the therapy request, the demand for to have therapeutic services has increased, which is not a bad thing. And I think that's part of the pandemic and people just being in a tough spot. But the unfortunate piece is we don't have enough practitioners to cover the demand. So we've been waiting for folks to come to therapy for years, and now they're coming, and we don't have enough reinforcements to support them therapeutically. So we can dive into, well, what does that mean, and what are some strategies later. But I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought that was a very fascinating conversation to have on KMOJ, and you brought up some really good points during that talk too, and hopefully we can elaborate on those here today.
Yeah, and I did hear about the situation with the member of the downtown council. He's actually a major attorney that lives down there. That's on
Okay.
that county. Yeah. And with he's matter of fact one of the attorneys that when they talk about the different police trials, that's who they interview on one of the local channels. So I've
Hmm.
seen him several times, uh, on the news. What's interesting is at the same time, St. Paul, our sister city, has seen crime downtown decrease.
Hmm.
Uh, at least that was the report, right? So, but we both know that to some degree the activity downtown St. Paul is a little less than downtown Minneapolis. Um, at the same time, um, and you outlined some of the more recent incidents. The one with the 12-year-old and the 18-year-old who shot him
Hmm.
is that the 12-year-old was fighting with another 12-year-old who happened to be the brother of the 18-year-old. I mean, that's the information I have. We all know that when things happen within the community, there's usually more details that are not shared that the community knows, and I'm hearing that there was some additional details with that. But just think about that. You got this 18-year-old and you got this 12-year-old whose life has been ended, so we have two families in the middle of this chaotic trauma on both sides, right?
Hmm.
So when we start talking about victims of these situations, a lot of times there's multiple victims in these situations, and even in the situation where you have both perpetrator and victim at the same time, which is a hard concept for folks to put their minds around many times, especially when we're talking about young people. And then you have, which I believe is to some degree the four individuals who are from Minneapolis that they found in a cornfield in a SUV
Yeah, St.
in
Paul.
Wisconsin. Um, it almost seems like it was to some degree execution, a cover up of some type, right? So
Hmm.
the more information we're getting out of that situation is been interesting, and there's been some arrests, and the information we have now in terms of the arrest, it was a father and son,
Hmm.
right? You know, and there's some information that the son might have been in a relationship with one of the individuals, and that
Hmm.
the father was the one accused of taking the trying to hide the bodies. You know, so um, which is a whole nother kind of conversation in itself. So I know that on Friday we were getting into what should we do, and I remember or what is the strategies. We hear a lot about different strategies. There was an event yesterday um, that was celebrating the 21 days of peace in the community, and saying that there was more arrests due to the 21 days of peace, and which includes here locally a lot of community organizations working together to gather information, to interrupt different incidents and that kind of stuff. And those are strategies we've heard about across the country, right?
Hmm.
And then you have then we also talked about, when people start talking about why this is happening, the usual kind of, I think, and I might not be being very nice, the usual gang activity conversation
Hmm.
that comes up when, especially when it's in our community, right? um and I think for me that's kind of a shallow conversation,
Hmm.
in a way, because it's much deeper. It's very, I see it as being a much deeper issue than just the ideals of gangs. I think it's also, in some parts of the community, is generational in terms of
Absolutely.
the attitude about life, or the minimization of life, or that has been going on, under, it's like this. You got this subtle rumble up under uh, 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 the daily conversation, right?
Hmm.
That people kind of know it's there, but they don't want to talk about it because of how it looks, in the community, and what kind of shadow would put on upon the community. Because again, I often say, when you talk about the Black community in our society, it's always seen in a negative light, right? Even
Right.
if the same thing is happening in the other communities, it's always seen in a negative light. And one of the real interesting things that I've seen, not just in our community and to various degrees other community, uh the entertainment in destruction,
Hmm.
through things like TikTok and Facebook and those kind of things. You know what I'm saying? Right now they got this new TikTok piece going on in schools where they're vandalizing bathrooms in schools all around the country, putting it on TikTok and this other kind of stuff.
Hmm.
In the suburban schools are having a major problem with that, and they send a little letter out to the families, and tell your kids this is wrong, and there's a different kind of approach to it, right? uh they barely mention that, there might be criminal charges, right, to this destruction.
Hmm.
And we know that often anything that happens in our community, criminal charges almost becomes first, right? So there's different levels of understanding that I think that needs to be approached differently. Because I remember when you were on the show, you were saying what parents can do, and you gave this list of things that parents can do. The stuff about knowing who your friends are, uh, paying attention to mood swings, and all these other kind of things. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, and do know that the suggestions depend on the dynamics within the family, and it's not easy to always do these things, especially if there's already disruption amongst the family dynamic. But in general, if you want to um, understand how to keep an eye out for these things within your own household, paying attention to drastic changes in your child's behavior is very important. Sometimes when children find themselves in when young people find themselves in situations, you'll notice their behavior start to shift in one direction or another, but it's a complete shift from where they were. Sometimes young people might isolate or avoid situations that they normally wouldn't do. They may switch up their friends pretty frequently. They may become a little bit more secretive. You may notice a reduction in their appetite, or their sleep patterns may change. Like, these are all things. Sometimes you can even tell with how they're dressing, what they're dressing, if it seems like they are carrying larger bags versus before where they didn't carry any bag, or whatever the case may be. You may want to just pay attention. I think that it's always healthy to ask questions without being an interrogator of your child, and asking them what are their thoughts on this and that and what's happening. See if they know people. Sometimes we have a lot of young folks who are grieving because one of their friends, or at least a classmate or somebody that they may have liked but did not know very well, ends up being shot, harmed, or murdered, and they don't know how to emotionally regulate or address those types of feelings, grief. And what ends up happening is they internalize that pain. And a lot of times we just want our kids to be happy, and we'll do anything in our power to make sure that they're happy. But sometimes they need to go through a down period, and they just need you to be a listening ear and a support. But a lot of times we meet our kids with aggression because we're trying to force them to emotionally be in a particular state. And I think that that's when you start to see kids drift away from home and into other activities as well. So, as parents, and I would say not even just parents and caregivers, but just as a uncle, a auntie, a concerned neighbor, a sibling, whatever the case may be. These are things that you have to pay attention to with these young people, especially these 10 through 16-year-olds, because that's the demographic where you're going to start to see a shift and a sway into this activity. And it's important to know, even if you're a young person, especially if you live within the community, even if your young person is not gang or clique involved, they still have to navigate the same schools, buses, parks, community patterns, whether that's how to walk from their home to the gas station, just like anybody else. And safety is at top of mind. And and in those environments, all those kids are being impacted by the ability to maintain their safety. And that's probably one of the number. If that's not the number one priority, it has to be number two. And it's a very difficult place for young people to grow and develop. So
Absolutely. And so, all of those things are very appreciative in terms of paying attention. We're really talking about paying attention, having some healthy conversations and communication with your young people, because you're right, they're exposed to these environments that these things are going on in, and being able to process those griefs and loss. That's
right,
one part of the population. But there's another part of the population that doesn't get noticed much or get talked about much, because I don't think we can emotionally handle thinking about this other part of the population. And during the show, we talked towards the end of the show, we start talking about generations of folks who've been on the grind,
right,
right? And when we're talking about on the grind, I see that as defined as folks who've been on survival mode for a long time. And there's
right,
different folks in communities, especially in our community, that has been doing generational survival mode for years, right? And different
right,
aspects of our whole community has been on different levels of survival, right? I mean, we got to be honest about, and that's the difficult piece about the effects of a community that has to have a higher level of survival mode for years, right? And how we navigate that survival mode means. So what do I mean by that? And this might sound, like you always bringing this up, but the thing is when we're talking about African Americans, especially African Americans, I know there are other African Americans from other countries, other places who are immigrants and have a slavery in their background, right? But when we're talking about America, I'm talking about Americans who have American slavery in their background. And so we're talking about different parts of our existence has been based on survival. And some of us have navigated that better than others. And and we know that different times in our history here in America, when the community seemed to be doing fairly okay, we keep getting these attacks. I call them attacks on the black community, right? And so sometimes when you're on survival mode, you don't always use your capacity, or don't feel like you have the capacity to think through things in a more long-term way, right? So now you got instant responses, and if whatever is important in the moment, and there's always been a current of that in our community, right? That we have been trying to navigate, where we'll see that current in our community of the drug dealer, the current in our community of pimpology, the currently of the community of a certain amount of violence in the community. I mean, we've been struggling with that in the community for years, right? Um, um, and so at times, what we our way of dealing with that is trying to make peace with it and trying to find ways not to negatively respond to it. It's like, well, what are they supposed to do? When you don't have opportunity, or or you got the issue of dealing with uh uh racism, white supremacy, when that's in, what do you expect of people, right? And trying to sort through that, because that's a reality, right? Different levels of that is a reality. And the originally the idea is, if we can get the importance of education. If I get education, and learn how to read and write, and do all the right things, work hard, present myself in a professional manner, and that kind of things, maybe things will get better, right? And we have generations of that, where young folks have of seeing where folks who have done those things still end up on the short end, right? And again, our way to emotionally set to deal with that at times is to just it gets so overwhelming just to accept certain behaviors, right? And when you accept certain behaviors, uh 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 it's hard to um get past that, or in some cases, integrate it into what we call culture, right? And how do we sort out that trauma, right? And how do we look at that continuous attack or continuous trauma at various levels? Again, on that continuum, you can see the continuum very different in different parts of our community, different ways. The whole thing about the religious part of our community, the very conservative part of our community, uh, 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 the part of our community, again, back to all, if you do all the right things, morally, we're higher, we have a higher moral standard than whites. I've heard all that stuff. Being at the age that I am, and going through several generations, and I've heard the tone be different, right? And we try to do these mental gymnastics around, look, we're human too. But and again, when you see folks doing the right things, and we're still not um seeing the response we think we see, and young people see this, right, as well. It almost seems, for some folks, hopeless. When we talk about that, in that mental piece. And then we have parts of our community that, we talk about, America ignored the black community, and especially different parts of the black community. We can get into politics and that kind of stuff, but there's a whole part of our community, as black people, we don't even we um because we're just trying to maintain and do what we need to do, say we're part of the middle class. There's parts of our community we don't even want to have a conversation about, right? And the only time we have that part of that conversation is when it seems to disrupt our vision of the community, or when it gets too close to us. I mean, it's not that we totally ignore it. We know it exists, and we try to deal with it. But the one piece that's the most common piece through all of this, no matter what level you are as a black person, is how this trauma, this continued attack when you're trying to do the right thing, has had on how we deal with each other, how we see ourselves in the world, how we parent, right? So back to that term about generations of the grind, right? Um, I deal with clients that concepts of health, just basic health, concept of thinking through things, concept of having goals, and what does that mean in putting steps to it, putting the work in, putting a different kind of work in, right? And becomes really difficult, right? And I had to learn. that concepts that I thought that adults should know because I know them, they don't. And there's a reason why they don't. Because it wasn't necessary
Right.
in their mission of survival, right? You know, the whole thing about, gun violence is often, I'm told, Mr. Simmons, I'd rather get caught with a gun than without a gun. So I'm not afraid of getting locked up,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And so when you get a system who says, we're gonna add automatically 5 more years for having a gun, a legal gun, and then want to be surprised when that doesn't change behavior enough to see something different, then that's emotional masturbation that you're doing. You're just doing stuff to make yourself feel good
Mm-hmm.
or feel like you did something artificially. And there's a lot of artificial bullshit going on in how we approach this from both the system and from the community, right? Because that certain realities are hard. I understand that. But
Mm-hmm.
that trauma piece, that ignoring the effects as human beings, why is it we can't put our minds around the uniqueness of our experience here in America? That and I mean, put your mind around the whole concept of our experience, right? I said something to somebody the other day, and this might sound out there, as I was talking to a group of folks after I did the show. There was folks outside by the car,
Oh wow.
after doing the show, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and we got to talking, and I said, and I still got to sort this out in my head, but what I said was, as Black people going through the experience of America, starting with slavery, we have it's been both a plus and a minus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the plus is we have been able to make good things out of shit. Okay, so I mean, think about it. You get a shitty beginning like slavery, and we have come out of that and made some great things out of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're so busy trying to make and better things out of this continuous kind of attack,
Right.
that we haven't been able to stop and say, what kind of effect has that had, that extra chore of living here has had on us,
Right.
right? And so, and the reason, part of the reason we don't do that is, again, we don't want people to believe, and we don't want to believe, and that's great, that there's something wrong with us. There's not about,
Right.
having our experience, and some of the responses, emotional and mental responses, is normal if it was happening to any human being. But the uniqueness of us is we have been able to make, make shit into roses at times, right? And but again, that's that whole, survive, that whole resiliency piece. But we never stop long enough to say, how is this showing up, or taking a real good look at how this showing up, right? And so, and we've been able to skirt by that. We have been able to skirt by that each generation to some degree, right? We talk about, the civil rights movement. We talk about the Black Power movement, because we knew the civil rights movement just felt like we were begging folks to treat us like we're human beings. The Black Power movement was, we are Black and we are human and we deserve everything, and that kind of thing. And that has been able to keep us to a certain pattern and a certain level, but we still had that underlying parts of our community that was just surviving. We had that the effects of white supremacy, male supremacy, white male supremacy, by the way, on view of what manhood, and all of these areas that we're trying to fit in that we really never really did because nobody would allow us, right? And we see this history throughout the history. If we look at the history of community, Black community, Tulsa's the new one, but we have many communities that were doing the right thing, making money, taking care of each other, learning the economic system, and get burnt down, blowed up. And it's like one of the biggest fears of America is when Black folks do well, that's a problem. That is a problem, right? And again, how does that affect, looking to ask the question, how does that affect the community? How does that affect even them and how they look at us? So let me see if I can make some real sense out of this. So we all the stuff you was talking about in terms of paying attention to our children and that kind of stuff. But we have a part of our community and in their way that has been on survival mode. Now,
Yes.
and that really increased. We were seeing it in the 1960s, when we were trying to still sort out how do we fit in all this, right? Trying to find our way. Think about it. We spent 246 or 49 whatever years knowing real clear where we fit. You a slave. You slave. And ever since then, we've been trying to figure out how do we fit in this. Some of us has been doing better than others. But with the last major blow, and I keep bringing this up, that we are suffering from a great deal, that, the balloon burst. It probably burst before this in the late 70s or early 70s and 69 and that kind of stuff, when we went through the riots and that kind of stuff. That was the original burst of the balloon, like we can't do this no more, is when we were inundated with crack. We were inundated with crack, and the system's only way of dealing with that within the community was punishment. Right. Making statements like, yeah, we got to go down here, and you see it on movies and documentaries. Let's go deal with these animals, right? And this was the police departments and legislation, right? And then and so now during the crack era, and because we as a community also suffer from the disease of high sexism, trying to find our footing as Black men, didn't realize the significance of how Black women been holding things together, right? Holding things together, and at the same time trying to elevate us to a level so that we could probably at least emotionally feel like we compete with white men who are insecure and incompetent in their own crazy ways, right? So in the late 70s, because we were just struggling, we was already struggling with the heroin in our community, right? And then you add crack in there, and crack had a major effect on Black women, which meant that it had a major effect on Black children, because Black women was the last bastion of safety for our community. They were holding the community together, even at the cost of themselves sometimes, right? And when babies could not even look upon, how we feel about our mamas in the Black community. And, yeah, my daddy might have been a Rolling Stone, but my mama was there, right? And that wasn't always true. But the issue is that's the way we seen it. And now I can't trust my mama.
Right.
And my baby sister, or my older sister, who's only 10, 11, 12 years old, she's running the house. And some of the young boys, we're running the house. We going hungry. The system, no investment in the inner city. Uncle Ronnie made sure of that, right? And so now I want to eat this like anybody else. I'm 10, 12 years old. The OGs is giving me this drugs because the OGs at that time realized that the system treated children differently than adults in terms of legal time,
Mm-hmm.
jail time, right? Let's keep it real. How we got them babies out here
Mm-hmm.
making that money. I get to feed my family. Then if my mama get stuck on crack, I supply her because I don't want her going into the crack house. Or I get to a point where I don't have no respect for her. Now I don't have no respect for the women. And we're just now admitting in our own community how devastating this was to black women and children, right?
Yeah.
And then what the response of the system was is, I'm going to punish you by taking your kids away because you don't care nothing about your kids. Because if you cared about your kids, you quit doing drugs. Now at the same time, we got the chemical dependency community talking about how hard addiction is to deal with, and all this sympathy and empathy they were giving folks in their own community about relapse is normal and all like this, right? And so now we want to dictate to them, you either stop drugs or we take your kids, or you either get rid of dude or we take care of your kids, because they went through that too,
Yep.
right? And we know how, when the thing is we love hard. We
Mm-hmm.
love hard. And so you get that mix. So we're talking about 40 years,
Right.
right? All those things that was kind of the threads that was still kind of holding our families together as a black community, at least giving us the illusion that we was holding our community together. Those fabrics no longer exist now.
Right.
And then you get the elders still talking about you children this and you children that, right? They just don't respect elders. Yeah, I don't respect somebody who's talking out both sides of their face.
Mm.
You telling me what I'm not supposed to do, and I know that you down the street doing it with Miss Sally. I grew up with that noise.
Right.
And then you not only do you do that, you do it in the church.
Right.
Right? You tell me I'm supposed to be pure and all this other kind of stuff. And we find out later on, Pastor so and so, and again, well, Sam, that happens. I'm just saying, we cannot ignore these things. We're at a point that we have to evolve and do some serious work in terms of getting above this, and we can't do it by ignoring the effects of experiencing continuous trauma in our existence here in America.
Right.
We can't do it no more.
Right.
And now these 40 and 45-year-old individuals who were the 10, 12-year-olds during the crack era, right? And it didn't get no better after the crack, right? And we got pockets of our community that been doing this struggle and surviving and making a way out of no way for so many generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, you want me to act a certain way when I've been catching hell from the time I've been born.
Right.
Then you want to tell me that I'm supposed to recover. Recover to what?
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, you at the same time, when I do talk about what I'm talking about, you don't validate that my experience is real because you can't handle that experience.
Right.
Right. And when and your response to my experience is that's crazy, and you wasn't strong enough and that kind of stuff. Now that experience is real. I hear it all the time. I hear people say, well, Sam, I grew up in Chicago. This is the way we lived. You made the best out of no way, right? And if that meant carrying a gun to get to school, that's what you did, right?
Yep.
And on top of that, how do you expect me to change that when I've been raised on go? Right? I've been raised on edge. Even when I go party, I was raised on edge.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the thing is I'm on edge. And even when the thing is when even when I have try to be happy, it my happiness might be at the cost of other people.
Right.
Right. And and so you're not talking to me. And when you do talk to me, you want to talk to me about how I wear my pants. And you want to talk to me about using nigga in a song.
Right.
Okay? And then on top of that, you go to the other extreme, leave them alone, just growing up. No, there's got to be a happy middle somewhere in there. There's nothing wrong with calling out behavior without insulting people.
Right.
Because people, again, I refer to my group because I've learned so much from these young men. They've taught me so much about how they have made things work in the middle of suffering, and don't even recognize some of what they have learned to accept is part of the suffering, right? And so and not realizing that there's certain concepts and certain ideals that are being used against them that's not being shared with them, right? Like terms like toxic masculinity. What the hell is toxic masculinity to a black man? Okay. And you break it down, and one young man said, "Oh my God, Mr. Simmons, that's us." But at the same time, he says, "Why don't nobody talk to us like this?" Well, one is we ain't talking to our own selves like this. I just, I mentioned that one of the incidents here, it was a father and son. And I bet you, and I'm not sure, that father is around 45 years old.
He might be a little older, but yes.
Right.
I think
not
he's like
much.
53. Yeah. I think he's in his early 50s from what I've seen.
But hey, that would fit. You know what I'm saying? And so you get three, you get these 4 generations of individuals who have learned how to cut the edge, skirt the system, deal with their trauma, make trauma normal in my life. Being black means that you're going to suffer a certain amount. You get too happy, you get scared, right? Things go well too long, I get scared. Think about that. So if we don't willing to dig deep into how do we help people heal at that level and at the upper level, because we got to do a certain amount of healing in that this whole called middle class level too, because they're hurting too. It just shows up differently.
It's just different resources, but same problems.
Yeah. And it's affecting how we raise our children, or affecting how we're not raising our children. Then now let me break. Some of us are not raising our children. We still got children still raising themselves, right? Because we can't handle the truth. So this whole thing about violence and gangs, we got young people out here who stimulate their entertainment by terrorizing other people and getting on Facebook. Notoriety, any means necessary. It's affecting our whole society, but it becomes even more dangerous when we're talking about this issue around violence. And I don't went on a tirade and I don't know, but it's frustrating to hear politicians, community members who talk about this stuff, who mean well, who care, and that kind of thing, but we can't get to that next level of truth that we have levels of. We have to start now dealing with the babies coming up, because there's different levels of this, right? That I know we're so used to, especially here in America, dealing with the problem when it's a problem, when we can't bear it. But we got to get on the early side of some of this. The early side of this, right? We are raising a bunch of a lot of emotional uh, uh, people are emotionally impotent. And when I mean emotionally impotent, they have such limited experience of understanding their emotions. And I just did this with my guys. We were talking about anger, and I was telling them, you have such a profound relationship as a
Right.
black man, as black people, with anger.
Yeah.
With
And,
anger.
let me chime in real quick because I said something a few years back that kind of rose some folks the wrong way in the training. And I said, when it comes to black people, we've been dealing with trauma for so long that anger is not a secondary emotion often
No,
for us.
well, okay.
It,
It's primary.
often it's a primary emotion because in the psychology world we say that anger is a secondary emotion, but there usually are circumstances that lead to that secondary level. But our circumstances have been so consistent that we don't need that first line of emotional defense. We go straight to pissed off, straight to I wish a motherfucker would. Like that statement is an African American proverb.
Right.
And
Well,
that to me is that anger's a first anger is a first primary emotion, and I always find it fascinating. It doesn't take long, and you even see it in young children who come from very traumatized homes and things as well.
but and I hear you. I still try to have that conversation about the secondary emotion when I talk to my clients.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
want them to develop that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
part of the healing is
Right,
being able to manage your emotions. It should be a secondary emotion,
right,
which means that what else is going on for you or your amygdala, if you want to talk about the brain science,
right.
where you just go from 0 to 100, and there is no filter. There is no filter.
And well, but the other reason why it's primary with us is there's so much that comes at you. It's like waking up angry. Because I
Yeah.
used to tell folks that. I wake up angry. That I have to go to work and that kind of stuff, and literally, doing anger management classes would introduce myself as an angry black man,
Hmm.
and folks were like, how do you get to do the group if you're an angry black man? I said, the difference between you and me is I'm admitting it. And
Yeah.
if you don't admit it, you can't do nothing about it.
Right.
Right? I have to get up an extra hour early or than I need to get up. Even today, even on doing Zoom meetings now, is this, used to be in public, but even Zoom
Mhm.
meetings, extra hour early to think about who the hell I got to talk to today, and start thinking about certain things that might happen and how to manage my anger. Because
Mhm.
if I don't manage my anger, my message gets lost.
Right.
And then when my message gets lost, especially if I don't manage my anger, now I get even more angry. And sometimes don't even know who to be angry, because now I'm angry at everybody because I allow myself to be gaslit by some happy smiling individual talking about kumbaya and in the world, right? I'm talking to you about historical trauma. Well, Mr. Simmons, that's fine, but we're really a celebrating people. Did I say we wasn't? Right. You know, you gotta find a way to shut my stuff down. Or at least that's the way it feels because of my own anger. The
Sure.
triggers, understanding the triggers. But we have a really major relationship with anger. I know that when we talk about racial trauma, we talk about the wounds of rage. So we're not talking about just anger. We're talking about rage, and rage is a much deeper emotion than anger, right? Rage is a simmering kind of thing. And we're seeing and you get to a point when you're angry or rageful for so long, you try to shut that emotion down to the
Mhm.
point where you don't care.
Right.
You don't
Mm.
have to be angry or rageful to do bad things to people.
Mm. Let me ask a question. I want to close this out, and it goes back to something that you said earlier about resiliency. And my question is, What is the value of being resilient if you do not move beyond your current state?
And ain't
So,
none.
okay. And why is that?
Well, because the thing so you're resilient, but when do you evolve?
Exactly.
When do you thrive? Okay, I can handle the shit, man. I can handle that shit, man.
Mm-hmm.
So when do I do more than just handle shit? You know,
Right.
when do I develop safeguards so I don't have to deal with so much shit? Right?
Bingo. Right.
You know, I mean, there's certain things I just don't do. There's certain things I don't do with certain folks. There's certain places I just ain't gonna go. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is I have no problem with other people being mad about that. You think you better than me. And man, I don't even think about you. Why do I think I'm better than you?
Mm.
I can't waste my time. I can't. Right? I don't like it that sometime, but again, I work real hard to build my own safety. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this ain't a safe space. Well, why are you gonna have somebody else be responsible for your safe space?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I asked a colleague of mine the other day, and I think it shocked him. I said, "Why do you think a system's supposed to care more about your children than you do?"
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you mean? I said, tell me that. Why do you think a system that has not been in your best interest is supposed to care more about your children than you do? People get mad when I ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is our conditioning has had us do things out of survival. We have adultified our children. We had made them grow up quicker than they need to, and it's all out of survival. It makes sense. It's human.
Mm-hmm.
If we really want to deal with our humanity, recognize our humanity, we have to deal with the effects of our trauma straight up.
Right. And not be ashamed of it,
Right.
or devalue the lesson within dealing with your trauma. I think another part too is we can't get stuck there. I think we've been conditioned very well to be victims and and to own our victimhood. And we have to not get stuck. Yes, we've been victimized. The system has tore us apart in various different levels, but we can't stay stuck there. We have to develop agency as a people. Because if we just stay stuck in victim mode, we're never going to get better.
Yeah, but see, the thing is when you say that, people get confused, right? Because you say those things victim mode, but you cannot get out of victim mode when you can't tell the whole truth about
Yeah,
the effects as a human being that this trauma has had on just simple things that other people take for granted.
agreed.
Right? I mean, and I always understand why we don't want to do it, because we don't want to deal with the ugly.
Right.
But this trauma has affected our relationships. When we want healthy relationships, it gets in the way. It gets in the way how we deal with each other as men and women, gets in the way of how we deal with our children, and some of this we might not be able to get around, but we have to deal with the humanity of the effects, our humanity. And that means dealing with the effects that this continuous trauma has had on us.
Yep.
To the point where we got babies out here who are baby, and not just babies, because again, we're talking about adults.
Mm-hmm.
The babies are when we would challenge the babies, we need to challenge ourselves, because our babies are a reflection of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I feel wore out now. I'm old.
um. Oh, let me tee up next week's conversation. I think
Professor.
I think we I think we stumbled across something a few different times, but we haven't directly addressed it. So, but we should have a conversation around sexism in black men. We've kind of touched on it a few different times, but I think we need to have a more direct conversation as far as how black men and our sexuality has been. Um, I would say it's been used against our ability to heal, and I can go more into that next week. but I feel like we've been hypersexualized and has been glorified, and many black men have accepted just the identity as far as how um, victorious we can be sexually. Let's say it that way, and that's where it stops for many of us. It's like it's all wrapped around our sexual abilities um, and that's how we valued one another is just through sex. So and if it because most black men are not athletic, we don't all play sports. So if you're not if you're not gifted athletically, what's the next thing that you get respect from? Sex. So
and
any thoughts on that?
and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's all tied into the same
yeah,
thing. We
yeah.
don't conquer business. We don't conquer community. Hell, we don't even in war. We don't conquer anything but hurting one another. But when it comes to sex, boy, that's our battlefield right there.
Okay, see you gonna see now you done brought it up. Now you see I've been trying to avoid having this conversation.
Well, it just keeps popping up,
I know.
in many different ways. I think we have to talk about it. It's hard to avoid because for me when we talk about community healing and the community getting better, we have to talk about how black men must evolve into something different as far as our identity, our morals, our goals, our values, whatever the case may be. We need to do something different. I'm not saying that black women don't, but as two black men, I think we've both seen enough, we've experienced enough working with black men that we know that black men are not in a collective good state.
Okay, on that note, we want to say hello to Val. She's back.
Hey Val.
Yeah. So and all of you who tuned in today, if this is your first time, this is how it goes. And as the young man said, I guess we're gonna be back next week.
We'll be back. God willing. We'll be back. All right, everybody. Take care. This is another installment of the Hillen Brothers podcast. Be sure to share this within your networks. Facebook is a great place to share it as we stream on Facebook weekly. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just search Hillen Brothers Podcast, and you should be able to find us on YouTube. Other than that, we will see you all next week. Peace.